My name is Jake Sullivan, and I've been riding the dusty trails of Texas for 32 years. I've seen cattle drives that stretched for miles, witnessed gunfights that left good men dead in the dirt, and survived droughts that could break a man's spirit. But nothing in my hard life prepared me for what I would witness in the town of Bitter Creek on that scorching August day in 1889. I'd ridden into town to sell a string of horses. I'd been breaking on my small ranch outside San Antonio. The work was honest, but barely profitable enough to keep me fed and my horse shod, but not much more. I was a man of simple needs, content with my solitary life under the vast Texas sky. Bitter Creek was the kind of frontier town that attracted desperate people and those who preyed on desperation. The main street was lined with saloons, gambling, halls, and businesses that operated in the gray areas of the law. I'd done business there before, always keeping my head down and my hand near my gun. After completing my horse sale, I was loading supplies into my saddlebags when I heard the commotion coming from the town square. A crowd had gathered around a makeshift platform, and the sound of an auctioneer's voice carried on the hot wind. My stomach turned when I realized what was happening. A human auction, one of the ugliest remnants of a practice that should have died with the war. I have mounted my horse and ridden away. I had no business watching such a spectacle, and I certainly had no money to waste on what I was about to witness. But something compelled me to stay. Perhaps the same morbid fascination that makes men slow down to look at accidents. The auctioneer was a fat man with a red face and cruel eyes, sweating profusely in his expensive suit. He paraded various people. Across the platform, strong men for ranch work, young women for domestic service, children whose only crime was having no family to protect them. Each sale was met with callous laughter from the buyers and silent despair from the sold. Then she was brought forward, and the crowd's reaction changed immediately. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with long auburn hair that caught the sunlight like burnished copper. But it was the scars that drew everyone's attention, angry red marks that crisscrossed the left side of her face and neck, disappearing beneath the collar of her simple brown dress. The scars looked like burn marks, old but still vivid against her pale skin. The crowd murmured with a mixture of pity and revulsion. Some men turned away, unable to look at her disfigurement. Others stared with the kind of morbid curiosity reserved for circus freaks. "Now here's an interesting proposition," the auctioneer announced, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "This one's been with us for quite some time. Previous owners found her difficult to place. The scars, as you can see, make her unsuitable for most domestic positions." The woman stood straighter at his words, her chin lifting in a gesture of defiance that was heartbreaking in its futility. Despite her obvious fear, there was something unbroken in her bearing, a dignity that the auctioneer's cruelty couldn't touch. "However," he continued, "she's young and strong, and the scars don't affect her ability to work. We'll start the bidding at her weight in corn, approximately 110 pounds of grain." I felt sick. They were literally selling her for the price of livestock feed. Do I hear any bids for 110 pounds of corn? Silence stretched across the square like a held breath. "Come now, gentlemen, that's barely $20 worth of grain for a healthy young woman." Still nothing. The woman's face remained impassive, but I could see her hands trembling slightly at her sides. $15. The auctioneer's voice cracked with desperation. $10. A few men in the crowd snickered, making crude comments about what use a scarred woman might have. The woman's face flushed with shame, but she kept her head high. $5. Then, surely someone can find a use for her at $5. That's when I found myself stepping forward, my voice carrying clearly across the silent square. $50. The crowd turned to stare at me in shock. $50 was more than most of these people made in 2 months. The auctioneer's eyes lit up with greed and surprise. $50 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 60? The square fell silent again. Nobody was going to bid against such an outrageous amount. Going once, going twice. Sold to the cowboy for $50. I pushed through the crowd to the platform, my heart pounding. What had I just done? I barely had $50 to my name, and I'd just spent it on a woman I'd never met. For reasons I couldn't explain. The auctioneer handed me a bill of sale with barely concealed glee. "Pleasure doing business with you, sir. She's all yours now." I looked up at the woman, who was staring down at me with a mixture of surprise and wariness. Up close, I could see that the scars, while prominent, didn't diminish the intelligence. In her dark brown eyes or the strength in her bearing. "What's your name?" I asked gently. She hesitated, as if deciding whether to trust me. "Elena," she said finally, her voice soft but clear. "Well, Elena, I'm Jake. Let's get you down from there." I helped her down from the platform, noting how she flinched slightly when I touched her arm. Whatever had caused those scars had left more than physical marks. "Where are we going?" she asked as I led her toward my horse. "Away from here," I said, simply. The ride to my ranch took most of the afternoon. Elena sat behind me on my horse, her arms wrapped around my waist for balance. I could feel the tension in her body, the way she held herself ready to run at the first sign of danger. My ranch was modest, a small cabin, a barn, and enough land to graze a few horses and cattle. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it was far enough from town that a man could live in peace. "This is your home?" Elena asked as we approached the cabin. "It is, and for now, it's yours too." I helped her down from the horse and showed her inside. The cabin was simple but clean. One large room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room, with a small bedroom off to one side. There was a loft above that I'd never had reason to use. "You can sleep up there," I said, pointing to the loft. "There's a ladder behind the stove." Elena nodded but didn't move. She stood in the middle of the room, looking lost and uncertain. "Are you hungry?" I asked. She nodded, and I realized she probably hadn't eaten a decent meal in days, maybe weeks. I prepared a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, watching out of the corner of my eye as Elena examined her surroundings. She moved carefully, touching nothing, as if afraid that any interaction with my belongings would bring punishment. When I set the plate of food in front of her, she stared at it for a long moment. "It's all right," I said gently. "Eat." She picked up the spoon with trembling hands and took a small bite, then another. Soon she was eating with the desperate hunger of someone who'd been denied food for too long. "Elena," I said when she'd finished, "I want you to understand something. I didn't buy you to be a slave. I bought you to get you away from that place." She looked up at me with those dark eyes, suspicion and hope warring in their depths. "Then what do you want from me?" she asked. It was a fair question, and one I wasn't sure I could answer. What did I want from her? I'd acted on impulse, driven by some protective instinct I didn't fully understand. "I want you to be safe," I said finally, "and I want you to know that you're worth more than your weight in corn." "But I'm damaged," she said, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the scars on her face. "Nobody wants damaged goods." "Who told you that you were damaged?" "Everyone." The word came out as barely a whisper. "Look at me. I'm hideous." I leaned forward, studying her face carefully. The scars were prominent, yes, but they didn't define her. Beneath them, I could see the remnants of what had once been exceptional beauty, and more importantly, the strength that had allowed her to survive whatever had marked her. "Elena, do you know what I see when I look at you?" She shook her head. "I see someone who survived something terrible. I see someone who's been through hell and came out the other side. Those scars aren't marks of damage, they're proof of your strength. You're just saying that to be kind. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I know what it's like to be marked by life." I rolled up my sleeve, revealing a long scar that ran from my wrist to my elbow, a souvenir from a knife fight in Abilene 5 years earlier. "This scar doesn't make me less of a man. It reminds me that I survived when I could have died. Your scars are the same proof that you're a survivor." Elena stared at my scar, then looked back at her own reflection in the window. "How did it happen?" I asked gently. "If you don't mind me asking." She was quiet for so long that I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began to speak. "There was a fire at the orphanage where I lived. I was 15. I went back into the burning building to save the younger children. I got them out. But ... she touched her face again. The roof collapsed as I was leaving. A burning beam fell across my face and neck. You saved children from a fire. 3 of them. They all lived." I stared at this young woman who'd been sold for the price of livestock feed, who'd been called damaged and worthless. She was a hero, and she didn't even know it. "Elena, you risked your life to save children. That makes you one of the bravest people I've ever met, but look what it cost me. No man will ever want me now. I can't even find work as a servant because people can't stand to look at me. Then they're fools. You're just being kind again." "No, I'm being honest. Beauty fades, Elena, but courage, that lasts forever." That night, I lay in my bed listening to the soft sounds of Elena moving around in the loft above. I wondered what I'd gotten myself into. I was a simple cowboy who lived a simple life. I wasn't equipped to help a traumatized young woman rebuild her confidence and find her place in the world. But something about Elena reminded me of a wild horse I'd once tried to break. She'd been beautiful but skittish, marked by cruel treatment from previous owners. Everyone said she was ruined, that she'd never trust humans again. But I'd seen something in her eyes, a spark, that hadn't been extinguished despite all the abuse. It had taken months of patient work, but eventually that horse had become the finest mount I'd ever owned. Not because I'd broken her spirit, but because I'd earned her trust. Maybe Elena just needed someone to earn her trust too. The next morning, I awoke to the smell of coffee and bacon. I found Elena in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to cook, out of necessity rather than joy. "You didn't have to do this," I said. "I wanted to. You've been kind to me. It's the least I can do." The breakfast was simple but well prepared. As we ate, I studied Elena's face in the morning light. The scars were still prominent, but somehow, they seemed less shocking now. Maybe it was because I was beginning to see past them to the person beneath. "Elena," I said, "what do you want to do with your life?" She looked surprised by the question. "I don't understand. I mean, if you could do anything, be anything, what would you choose?" I don't know. I've never thought about it. I've always just tried to survive." "Well, now you don't have to just survive. You can live. So what would make you happy?" She was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "I used to love horses. she said finally. Before the fire, I worked in the stables at the orphanage. I was good with them. They didn't seem to mind that I was different from the other children. Different how? I was always too serious, too quiet. The other children thought I was strange, but the horses, they just accepted me as I was. I smiled. Would you like to work with horses again? Could I? Elena, I breed and train horses for a living. I could use a partner who understands them, but I don't know anything about breeding or training. You can learn if you want to. For the first time since I'd met her, Elena smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. The scars were still there, but they seemed to fade in the light of her joy. I'd like that very much, she said. Then that's what we'll do. As the days passed, I began to see the real Elena emerge from behind the walls she'd built to protect herself. She had a natural gift with horses that couldn't be taught, an intuitive understanding of their moods and needs. More importantly, she had the patience and gentleness that made even the most skittish animals trust her, but it was her courage that impressed me most. The same bravery that had driven her back into a burning building to save children now drove her to face each new challenge without flinching. She might have been scarred on the outside, but her spirit was unbroken. And slowly, day by day, I found myself falling in love with the woman who'd been sold for her weight in corn. The woman who was worth more than all the gold in Texas. 3 weeks after bringing Elena to my ranch, I realized that saving her from the auction had been the easy part. Helping her heal from years of rejection and cruelty would take much longer. Elena threw herself into working with the horses with an intensity that bordered on desperation. She was up before dawn, tending to the animals, cleaning stalls, and learning everything I could teach her about horse care. It was as if she believed that if she worked hard enough, she could somehow earn her place in the world. Elena, I said one morning, as I found her already grooming the horses in the pre-dawn darkness, you don't have to prove anything to me. I want to earn my keep, she replied without looking up from her work. You already have, but more than that, you belong here. Not because of what you do, but because of who you are. She paused in her grooming, her hand stilling on the horse's neck. I don't know who I am anymore, Jake. For so long I've been defined by what happened to me, by these scars. I don't know how to be anything else. I moved closer, careful not to startle her. Elena still flinched sometimes when people approached too quickly, a response born from too many cruel reactions to her appearance. Then let's figure it out together, I said. But first, you need to understand something. You're not just the woman with scars. You're Elena, the woman who saved children from a fire, who has a gift with horses, who's brave enough to start over when most people would have given up. Sometimes I wonder if it would have been better if I'd died in that fire, she said quietly. At least then I'd be remembered as a hero, instead of living as a reminder of tragedy. Her words hit me like a physical blow. Don't ever say that. The world is better because you're in it. How can you say that? You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're kind to animals. I know you work harder than anyone has a right to expect. I know you have nightmares about the fire, but you never complain. And I know that in the 3 weeks you've been here, you've made this place feel more like a home than it has in years. Elena finally looked at me, her dark eyes searching my face. Why are you being so kind to me? What do you want in return? It was a question she'd asked before, and I'd given her honest but incomplete answers. The truth was more complicated than I'd been willing to admit, even to myself. At first I just wanted to help someone who needed it, I said. But now, now I want to see you smile more. I want to see you realize how remarkable you are. And I want to be the man who gets to witness your transformation. Transformation into what? Into whoever you want to be. That afternoon, I decided it was time to introduce Elena to one of my most challenging projects. In the far pasture, I kept a young stallion named Thunder, a magnificent black horse with a wild spirit that had resisted all my attempts at training. He was abused by his previous owner, I explained as we approached the fence. Beaten and mistreated until he lost all trust in humans. I've been working with him for months, but he won't let anyone get close. Elena studied the horse, taking in his nervous movements and the way he shied away from our presence. He's beautiful, she said softly. He is, but he's also dangerous. His fear makes him unpredictable. Fear often does that, Elena said, and I realized she wasn't just talking about the horse. Would you like to try working with him? Elena looked surprised. Me? But you said he was dangerous? He is. But sometimes it takes someone who understands fear to reach another frightened soul. We spent the next hour just sitting by the fence, letting Thunder get used to our presence. Elena didn't try to approach him or call to him. She simply existed in his space, patient and non-threatening. Tell me about the fire, I said quietly as we watched the horse graze at a safe distance. Was silent for so long that I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began to speak. It started in the kitchen. Old building, dry wood, and a careless cook who left grease too close to the fire. By the time anyone noticed, the whole first floor was engulfed. She paused, her hand unconsciously moving to touch her scars. I was on the second floor when I heard the screaming. The younger children were trapped in their dormitory. The stairs were already burning, but there was a window that led to the roof of the kitchen. You climbed out the window. I had two. There were 3 children, Mary, who was only 6, and the twins, Peter and Paul, who were 8. They were too scared to move, just huddled in the corner crying. How did you get them out? One at a time. I carried Mary first, then came back for Peter, then Paul. The roof was getting hot under my feet, and I could hear the building groaning, but I couldn't leave them, and that's when you were hurt. Elena nodded. I was carrying Paul, the last one, when part of the roof collapsed. A burning beam fell across my face and shoulder. I managed to get Paul to safety, but she touched her scars again. You saved 3 children's lives, and ruined my own in the process. Elena, look at me. I waited until she met my eyes. You didn't ruin your life. You chose to value other lives above your own comfort. That's not ruin, that's heroism. Heroism that left me unmarriageable and unemployable. Heroism that revealed your true character. Any man who can't see past these scars to the incredible woman beneath them isn't worthy of you. You're the only person who's ever said that. Then everyone else is a fool. As we talked, Thunder had gradually moved closer to the fence. He was still wary, but his curiosity was overcoming his fear. He's listening to us, Elena observed. Horses are good judges of character. They can sense things about people that we often miss. What do you think he senses about me? Probably the same thing I do, that you're someone who understands pain but hasn't let it make you cruel. Elena stood slowly and approached the fence. Thunder tensed but didn't bolt. Easy, boy, she said softly. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. The horse's ears pricked forward at the sound of her voice, but being scared doesn't mean we have to be alone, she continued. Sometimes the best thing we can do is find someone else who understands. To my amazement, Thunder took a step closer to the fence. Elena extended her hand, palm up, letting him catch her scent. That's it, she murmured. I'm not going to hurt you. I know what it's like to be afraid of people. Thunder stretched his neck forward and gently sniffed her hand. It was the closest he'd let any human get in months. You have a gift, I said quietly. Or maybe I just speak his language, Elena replied. The language of the wounded. Over the following weeks, Elena's work with Thunder became a metaphor for her own healing. Each day, she spent hours by his fence, gradually earning his trust. And as Thunder learned to trust again, so did Elena. She began to smile more often, to laugh at my terrible jokes, to share stories about her life before the fire. I learned that she'd been an orphan since birth, never knowing her parents. Raised by the church with a dozen other unwanted children, the fire had been the defining tragedy of a life that had already known too much hardship. But I also learned about her dreams. She'd always wanted to see the ocean, to travel beyond the small world of the orphanage and the frontier towns where she'd tried to find work. She loved to read but had rarely had access to books. She had a beautiful singing voice but was too self-conscious about her appearance to sing in front of others. Sing for me, I asked one evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. I couldn't. Why not? People don't want to look at me when I sing. It ruins the beauty of the music. Elena, your scars don't diminish your voice any more than they diminish your worth. Please, sing for me. After a long hesitation, she began to sing a hymn she'd learned at the orphanage. Her voice was pure and clear, with a haunting quality that spoke of pain transformed into beauty. As she sang, I found myself thinking that I'd never heard anything more lovely. When she finished, there were tears in my eyes. That was beautiful, I said. You're just being kind. I'm being honest, Elena. You have so many gifts. You're away with horses, your courage, your voice, you're remarkable. I don't feel remarkable. Most days, I just feel grateful to be alive. That's enough. Gratitude is a good place to start. 1 month after Elena's arrival, Thunder finally let her touch him. I watched from a distance as she slowly extended her hand and placed it on his neck. The horse trembled but didn't pull away. Good boy, she whispered. See, I told you I wouldn't hurt you. It was a breakthrough for both of them. Thunder had learned to trust again, and Elena had proven to herself that she could heal something that others had given up on. I think he's ready to start real training, she said as she walked back to where I stood. I think you're right. But Elena, I want you to be the one to train him. Me. But I don't know how to train horses. You know how to understand them. That's more important than technique. I can teach you the rest. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. That night, as we sat by the fire planning Thunder's training regimen, Elena asked me a question that had been weighing on her mind. Jake, what happens when Thunder is trained? When he's ready to be sold? What do you mean? I mean, what happens to me? Do I stay here? Do I go somewhere else? I need to know what to expect. I looked at this woman who'd become so much more than I'd ever imagined when I'd impulsively bid on her at that auction. She'd transformed my lonely ranch into a home, my solitary existence into something richer and more meaningful. Elena, I hope you'll stay. Not as someone I rescued, not as an employee, but as my partner. In every sense of the word, your partner. If you'll have me. I know I'm not much, just a cowboy with a small ranch and big dreams. But I love you, Elena, not despite your scars, but including them. They're part of your story. Part of what makes you who you are. Elena stared at me in shock. You love me. I do. I love your courage, your kindness, your strength. I love the way you sing when you think no one is listening. I love how you've brought life back to this place. And yes, I love your scars, because they're proof of your heroism. Tears began to flow down Elena's cheeks. No one has ever said they loved me. Before then, they were all missing out on something extraordinary. But Jake, look at me. Really look at me. I'm damaged goods. You could have any woman you wanted. I don't want any woman. I want you, exactly as you are. Elena reached up and touched her scars, then looked at me with wonder in her eyes. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. She was quiet for a long moment, and I held my breath, waiting for her answer. I love you too, she said finally. I didn't think I was capable of love anymore, but you've shown me that my heart isn't as damaged as I thought. Your heart was never damaged, Elena. It was just protected. And now you don't need those walls anymore, because I have you to keep me safe. Because you're strong enough to keep yourself safe. I'm just here to remind you of that when you forget. As Elena moved into my arms, I thought about the chain of events that had brought us together. A cruel auction, an impulsive purchase, a woman sold for her weight in corn. But sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the ugliest beginnings. Elena had been right about speaking Thunder's language, the language of the wounded, but she'd also learned to speak a new language, the language of love, trust, and second chances. And I'd learned that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones that everyone else considers damaged beyond repair. 6 months after I'd brought Elena home from that terrible auction, our ranch had become something I'd never dared to dream of, a place of healing, love, and new beginnings. Elena had not only found her place in my world, she'd transformed it into something better than I'd ever imagined possible. Thunder's transformation had been remarkable. Under Elena's patient guidance, the once wild stallion had become a magnificent riding horse, responsive and gentle despite his powerful build. But more importantly, his healing had mirrored Elena's own journey, from fear to trust, from isolation to love. He's ready, Elena announced one morning as she led Thunder through a complex series of maneuvers in the training corral. The horse responded to her slightest command, moving with the grace and precision of a dancer. Ready for what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. To be sold? He's everything a buyer could want. Strong, intelligent, well-trained, and gentle. I watched as Elena put Thunder through his paces, noting the bond between them. In training the horse, she'd found her calling. Word of her gift with difficult animals had spread throughout the territory, and we'd begun receiving requests from ranchers with problem horses they couldn't handle. Are you sure you want to sell him? I asked. Elena paused, her hand resting on Thunder's neck. He deserves an owner who can give him the life he was meant for. Keeping him here would be selfish. And what about you? What kind of life are you meant for? She smiled, the expression transforming her scarred face into something radiant. I think I'm living it. That afternoon, we had visitors. A wealthy rancher named Charles Morrison had ridden over from his spread near Austin, accompanied by his son David. They'd heard about Thunder and were interested in purchasing him for their breeding program. I watched Elena's face as the Morrisons examined Thunder. There was pride in her expression as they praised the horse's training, but also sadness at the thought of letting him go. This is exceptional work, Charles Morrison said, running his hands along Thunder's flanks. Who trained him? Elena did, I said, putting my arm around her shoulders. Both men turned to look at Elena, and I saw the familiar sequence of reactions play across their faces. Surprise at seeing a woman credited with horse training, followed by shock at her scars. Then, awkward attempts to hide their discomfort. A woman trained this stallion, David Morrison asked, his tone skeptical. The best horse trainer I've ever seen, I replied firmly. Well, that's quite unusual, Charles Morrison stammered, clearly struggling with the concept. Elena stepped forward, her chin raised in the gesture of quiet dignity I'd come to love. Would you like to see what he can do, Mr. Morrison? For the next hour, Elena demonstrated Thunder's training. She showed how he could be ridden with the lightest touch, how he responded to voice commands, how he could navigate obstacles with precision and grace. The Morrisons watched in growing amazement as this scarred young woman displayed a mastery of horsemanship that few men could match. Remarkable, Charles Morrison said when the demonstration was finished. Simply remarkable. We'll take him, of course. Name your price. The negotiation that followed resulted in the highest price I'd ever received for a horse. As the Morrisons prepared to leave with Thunder, David Morrison approached Elena. Miss, I hope you don't mind me asking, but how did you learn to train horses like that? I listened to them, Elena said simply, and I understand what it's like to be afraid. Well, you have an extraordinary gift. If you ever decide to expand your operation, we'd be interested in sending more horses your way. After the Morrisons left with Thunder, Elena stood at the fence where she'd first approached the frightened stallion. I could see tears in her eyes. You're going to miss him, I said. I am, but I'm also proud of him. He's going to have a good life. And what about us? Are we going to have a good life? Elena turned to me, and in her eyes I saw a future full of possibilities. I think we already do. That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Elena surprised me with an announcement. Jake, I've been thinking about something. What's that? I want to marry you. I nearly choked on my coffee. Elena, that's supposed to be my line? Why? Because you're the man and I'm the woman. Because you rescued me and I should be grateful. No, because I was working up the courage to ask you myself. She laughed, the sound like music in the evening air. Then ask me. I stood up and walked to where she sat, then dropped to one knee beside her chair. Elena, will you marry me? Yes, she said without hesitation. But I have conditions. Name them. I want to keep training horses. I want to build something together, a real business where we help animals and their owners. And I want children someday, if we're blessed with them. All of that sounds perfect to me. Even the children part. What if they inherit my scars? Elena, your scars aren't something to be inherited. They're marks of courage. And any child of ours would be lucky to have your strength and compassion. And if people stare at us, if they whisper about the scarred woman and the cowboy who married her, let them whisper. I'll be too busy being proud of my wife to care. We were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Bitter Creek, the same town where Elena had been sold for her weight in corn, now witnessed her transformation into a respected businesswoman and beloved wife. The wedding was small, just a few neighbors and friends who'd come to know and respect Elena for her skills and character. But as I watched her walk down the aisle in a simple white dress, her scars visible but somehow beautiful in the afternoon light, I thought she was the most magnificent woman I'd ever seen. Do you, Jacob Sullivan, take Elena to be your lawfully wedded wife? The preacher asked. I do, I said, my voice strong and clear. And do you, Elena, take Jacob to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, she replied, her voice steady despite the tears of joy in her eyes. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. As I kissed Elena for the first time as my wife, I heard a few gasps from the congregation. Not gasps of horror at her scars, but gasps of recognition. They were witnessing something beautiful. A love that transcended physical appearance and social expectations. Our first year of marriage brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. We expanded our horse training operation, taking on increasingly difficult cases. Elena's reputation grew throughout Texas as the woman who could gentle any horse, no matter how wild or traumatized. But it was her work with a young girl named Sarah that truly showed me the depth of Elena's gift for healing. Sarah was the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a 12-year-old who'd been thrown from her horse and was now too terrified to ride again. Her father brought her to us as a last resort. She used to love horses, he explained. But ever since the accident, she won't even go near the stable. Elena knelt down to Sarah's level, bringing her scarred face close to the girl's. I know, you're scared, she said gently. I used to be scared too. Of horses, Sarah asked. Of people, of being seen, of being judged. Because of your scars? Yes, but I learned something important. Being scared doesn't mean you're weak, it means you're human. Over the following weeks, Elena worked with Sarah, not just to overcome her fear of horses, but to understand that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite fear. The bravest people I know, Elena told Sarah, are the ones who are afraid but do what needs to be done anyway. Like you did in the fire, like you're doing now, by coming here even though you're scared. By the end of the month, Sarah was riding again, her confidence restored by Elena's patient guidance and understanding. How did you know what to say to her? I asked Elena that night, because I remembered what it felt like to be afraid and alone. And I remembered how it felt when someone finally saw past my fears to the person underneath. You mean when I bought you at the auction? No, she said, smiling. I mean when you taught me that I was worth more than my weight in corn. 2 years after our wedding, Elena gave birth to our first child, a daughter we named Hope. She was born perfect and healthy. With Elena's dark eyes and my stubborn chin, she's beautiful, Elena whispered as she held our daughter for the first time. Just like her mother, I replied. Jake, what if people are cruel to her because of me? What if they judge her because of my scars? Then we'll teach her what you taught me, that true beauty comes from the inside, and that the opinions of small-minded people don't matter. And if she asks about my scars, we'll tell her the truth. That her mother is a hero who saved children from a fire, and that these scars are proof of her courage. As I watched Elena cradle our daughter, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. It had started with an act of impulse, a cowboy spending his last $50 to save a woman being sold for the price of livestock feed. But it had become something much more profound. It had become a love story that proved beauty wasn't about perfection, but about character. It had become a partnership that showed two broken people could heal each other, and it had become a family built on the foundation of acceptance, courage, and unconditional love. Elena had been right when she said she spoke the language of the wounded, but she'd also learned to speak the language of hope, of second chances, of love that sees past surface scars to the beauty beneath. The woman who'd been sold for her weight in corn had become priceless. Not because her scars had disappeared, but because she'd learned to see herself through the eyes of someone who loved her completely, and had learned that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones that everyone else considers damaged beyond repair. Sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most unlikely places, marked by hardship, but made beautiful by the courage to keep going. Elena never did lose her scars. They remained with her for the rest of her life. A visible reminder of the night she'd chosen to save others at great cost to herself, But they also became something else, a symbol of the strength that had attracted me to her, the courage that had enabled her to rebuild her life, and the love that had transformed us both. Years later, when people asked me about the secret to our happiness, I would tell them about a woman who was sold for her weight in corn but was worth more than all the gold in Texas. I would tell them about scars that marked not damage, but heroism, and I would tell them that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin in the most unlikely places. Because sometimes, when you're brave enough to see past the surface, you discover that the most precious things in life are the ones that everyone else has overlooked. The end.